They call us betas disposable. We are the placeholders, the quiet shadows in a world of loud alphas and frantic omegas. For 3 years, I was a secret, until the night he kissed another alpha in front of the whole world and traded me to his worst enemy like a piece of property. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about a man who didn't want to own me, but was patient enough to wait for me to finally choose myself. If you're ready for a story that moves from the cold ache of rejection to the kind of slow burn healing we all crave, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and join us here at the BL Story Room. We're growing every day, and I don't want you to miss a single chapter of this journey. Before we dive into the night the glass finally shattered, I want to know who is listening tonight. Our community is reaching every corner of the globe, and I'd love to see where you're tuning in from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. I'll be hearting my favorite locations. Now take a deep breath. Let's go back to that New York gala where the air smelled like expensive bourbon and the sound of my heart breaking. Chapter 1. The Invisible Weight of Glass. The air in the New York ballroom was thick with the scent of predatory power. It was a suffocating mix of expensive bourbon, cedarwood, and the sharp, metallic tang of alphas posturing for dominance. Han Seojin stood in the corner, holding a champagne flute that had gone warm 10 minutes ago. As a beta, he was invisible here. He had no scent to project, no aura to command respect. He was just a shadow following the sun, and the sun was Kong Ryujin. Ryujin was in the center of the room, his laughter cutting through the classical music like a blade. He looked perfect, charismatic, lethal, and devastatingly handsome. For 3 years, Seojin had been the person Ryujin went home to. He had cleaned Ryujin's wounds after syndicate brawls, kept his secrets, and shared his bed. But he had never shared his name. He's doing it again, a voice whispered nearby. Seojin followed the gaze of the socialites. Ryujin wasn't just talking to the daughter of the Southern Pack leader. He was claiming her space. His hand was on her waist, and then with a casualness that felt like a physical blow to Seojin's chest, Ryujin leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a peck. It was a declaration of intent, a public bonding ritual in front of the entire elite society. The champagne glass in Seojin's hand trembled. His heart felt like it was being squeezed by a cold, wet hand. He waited for Ryujin to look at him. He waited for a flicker of guilt, a sign that this was just business. But when Ryujin's eyes finally found Seohyun's, there was nothing but boredom. Seohyun, Ryujin said, walking over 5 minutes later, the alpha girl still tucked under his arm. He didn't even smell like himself anymore. He was covered in her floral, aggressive pheromones. You look stiff. Go get a drink. Or better yet, go home. We're moving things along tonight. Moving things along? Seojin's voice was a dry rasp. Ryujin, everyone saw that. You told me we were stable. Ryujin leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous hum that usually made Seojin's knees weak. Now it just made him feel sick. You're a beta, Seojin. You're great for the quiet nights, but you can't give me a lineage. You can't solidify a treaty. You've had 3 good years in a high-rise. Don't get greedy now. The dismissal was so casual it was haunting. I'm not a piece of furniture. Ryujin, Seojin whispered, his vision blurring. Actually, a new, colder voice interrupted. A tall man in a dark charcoal suit stepped out of the shadows. He didn't have Ryujin's loud, vibrating energy. He was like a deep forest at midnight, quiet, heavy, and vast. This was Seo Tae-hyuk, the North's most feared alpha. The man who didn't need to growl, because everyone already knew he could end them. In the new treaty, Taek said, his eyes fixed on Seojin, ignoring Ryujin entirely, the Southern interests are being balanced. Ryujin is taking his new mate. And you, Seojin, are coming with me. The room went silent. Seojin felt like he was watching a movie of his own life. He was being traded. One alpha was done with him, so he was being handed to the rival to keep the peace. See, Ryujin smirked, patting Seojin's shoulder as if he were a pet being given to a better home. Tae-hyuk needs someone who knows the inner workings of the city, and I need a clean slate. It's a win-win. Seojin looked at Ryujin, the man he had loved, the man he had let break him, and then at Tae-hyuk, whose expression was like unreadable stone. I don't have a choice, do I? Seojin asked. Choice is a luxury for those with power. Little beta, Ryujin said, turning back to his new prize. Seojin didn't cry. He didn't have the energy left. He just followed the silent, massive alpha toward the exit, leaving the warmth of the gala for the freezing rain of the New York streets. Chapter 2. The Sound of Silence. The drive to the northern estate took 4 hours. For the entire duration, Seo Taehyuk didn't say a single word. Seojin sat in the back of the black SUV, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. He felt hollow. The betrayal was a dull ache now, replaced by a terrifying uncertainty. He knew the stories about Taehyuk. They called him the silent executioner. They said his house was a place where people went to disappear. He expected chains. He expected a cold room and a list of demands. He was a beta transferred to a rival. He was, for all intents and purposes, a political prisoner. When the car finally pulled up to a rival, he was for all intents and purposes a political prisoner. When the car finally pulled up to a sprawling modern house nestled in the woods of Vermont, the rain had turned to a soft, eerie mist. Out, Taehyuk said. It was the first word he'd spoken. It wasn't a shout, but the authority in it made Sejin's pulse jump. Sejin stepped out, shivering in his thin dress suit. His shoes were ruined by the mud. He waited for the alpha to grab his arm, to pull him inside to show him where his place would be. Instead, Taehyuk just walked toward the front door. He stopped after a few steps and looked back over his shoulder. He saw Seojin standing there looking like a drowned bird. The guest suite is on the second floor, Taehyuk said, his voice level. There are dry clothes in the closet. The kitchen is stocked. Eat if you're hungry. Sleep if you're tired. Seojin blinked, confused. Where? Where is your room? Taehyuk's eyes narrowed slightly. On the third floor. I don't go to the second floor unless invited. Seojin stood frozen. I don't understand. Ryujin said, I was being transferred to you. You were, Taehyuk said, stepping into the warmth of the house. You're under my protection now. That means Ryujin can't touch you, and the syndicate can't use you as a pawn. Beyond that, what you do with your time is your business. But what do you want from me? Seojin asked, his voice cracking. Information? My body? What's the price? Taehyuk paused, his hand on the banister. He looked at Seojin, not with the predatory hunger Ryujin always had, but with a strange, tired kind of patience. You smell like someone else's stress, Seojin, Taehyuk said. Go take a shower. Wash that alpha off your skin. We can talk when you've remembered how to breathe. He turned and disappeared up the stairs, leaving Seojin alone in the foyer. The house was silent. It was a silence Seojin wasn't used to. With Ryujin, there was always noise. Loud music, shouting, the constant, heavy pressure of an alpha's pheromones demanding submission. Here the air was clean. It was just the smell of pine trees and rain. Seojin found the guest suite. It was just the smell of pine trees and rain. Seojin found the guest suite. It was larger than the apartment he'd shared with Ryujin for 3 years. The bed was covered in soft, heavy wool blankets. In the closet, he found simple things. Oversized hoodies, soft cotton pants, sweaters. He stripped off his suit, the suit Ryujin had picked out for him to look the part, and threw it in the trash can. He stepped into the shower, turning the water as hot as he could stand. He scrubbed his skin until it was red, desperate to get rid of the lingering scent of Ryujin's cedarwood and that other girl's perfume. He stayed in the water until it ran cold. When he finally climbed into the bed, he expected to lie awake, haunted by the image of Ryujin kissing that alpha. But the silence of the house was like a heavy blanket. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he had to be ready for an alpha's mood. He fell asleep before his head hit the pillow. Chapter 3. The Danger of Gentleness. Seojin woke up to the sound of a bird chirping outside his window. It was a sharp contrast to the sirens and heavy bass of New York City. For a moment, he forgot where he was, reaching out to the other side of the bed. It was cold, empty. Then, the memory of the gala hit him like a punch to the gut. He sat up, his chest tight. He was wearing an oversized gray hoodie he'd found in the closet. It smelled faintly of laundry detergent and something else, something like cold air and stone. It was Taehyuk's scent, but it wasn't forced. It was just there, a quiet presence. He He crept downstairs, his heart thumping against his ribs. He expected to find Taehuk waiting with a list of rules, or perhaps a phone for Seojin to start making calls to syndicate contacts. He was a beta raised in the elite circles. He knew secrets. That had to be why Taehuk took him. He found Taehuk in the kitchen. The alpha was wearing a simple black t-shirt, his back turned as he moved around the stove. There was no aggressive posture, no pheromones filling the room to remind Seojin who was in charge. I can do that, Seojin said, his voice small. Taehuk turned, a spatula in his hand. He looked at Seojin's messy hair and the way he was drowning in the hoodie. Do what? Cook. Clean. Whatever you need, Seojin said, stepping forward. He felt a desperate need to be useful. In Ryujin's world, a beta who wasn't useful was a beta who got replaced. I'm good at organizing schedules, too. I know how you like your coffee. Taehuk set the spatula down. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. How do I like my coffee, Seojin? Seojin opened his mouth, then closed it. He realized he had no idea. He only knew how Ryujin liked it. 3 sugars, extra cream, served exactly at 7 a.m., or there would be hell to pay. I don't know, Seojin whispered, looking at his feet. I drink it black, and I make it myself, Taehuk said. He walked over to the table and pulled out a chair. Sit down. The eggs are almost done. But I should be doing something, Seojin insisted, his voice rising with a touch of panic. You didn't take me from the gala just to give me a guest room. I'm a beta. I know how this works. What's my job here? Taehuk walked closer. He didn't stop until he was a few feet away. He was massive, his shadow swallowing Seojin, but he didn't lean in. He stayed exactly outside Seojin's personal space. Your job is to stop shaking, Taehuk said, his voice like low thunder. Ryujin conditioned you to think every breath you take has to be earned. It doesn't. Not here. Everyone wants something, Taehuk, Seojin snapped, the stress finally breaking through his polite shell. Don't act like you're a saint. You're a syndicate hat. You're an alpha. You want something from me? Taehuk's eyes flashed, a brief, stormy gray, but his voice remained calm. I want to see what you look like when you aren't afraid of being hit. That's it. Now eat your breakfast. He placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of Seojin. Seojin stared at the food. It was simple, a little bit burned on the edges. It was the most human thing he'd seen in years. He took a bite, and suddenly he was simple, a little bit burned on the edges. It was the most human thing he'd seen in years. He took a bite, and suddenly he was crying. He didn't sob. The tears just leaked out of his eyes and fell onto the toast. He waited for the alpha to get annoyed. He waited for Taehuk to tell him to stop being pathetic or to go to his room. Ryujin hated it when Seojin cried. Beta emotions are a drain, he used to say, but Taehuk didn't say anything. He just sat across from him, drinking his black coffee, and waited. He didn't offer a tissue. He didn't pat his hand. He just gave Seojin the space to be miserable. It was the most terrifying thing Seojin had ever experienced. The restraint was heavier than any chain. It forced Seojin to look at his own pain without the distraction of an alpha's anger. When Seojin finally finished, his face was puffy and his throat was sore. There's a library down the hall, Taehuk said, picking up the empty plate. There's a sketchbook in the top drawer of the desk. I heard you used to draw before you met him. Seojin froze. How did you know that? I pay attention, Taehuk said, walking toward the sink. As Seojin walked toward the library, he felt a strange pull in his chest. It wasn't the bond that alphas and omegas talked about. It was something different. It was a curiosity. He spent the afternoon in the library. The sketchbook was high quality, the paper thick and cream-colored. He held a pencil in his hand, his fingers feeling clumsy. He hadn't drawn in 3 years. Ryujin had called it a distraction from Seojin's duties. He began to draw the trees outside, the jagged lines of the Vermont maples, the way the mist clung to the ground. He was so engrossed that he didn't hear the phone ringing in the hallway. He didn't hear Taehuk's voice go cold and sharp. He's not here for you to talk to Ryujin. Taehuk's voice drifted through the door, sounding like ice breaking. He's mine to protect. The transfer is final. If you set foot on this property, I won't call the police. I'll call a funeral home. Seojin gripped the pencil so hard the lead snapped. The piece wasn't real. The war was just waiting for the mist to clear. Chapter 4. The ghost and the phone. The next few days were a strange, quiet dance. Seojin would wake up, eat the breakfast Taehyuk made, and then retreat to the library or the garden. He was starting to learn Taehyuk's rhythms. The alpha was a man of few words, but his actions were loud. He noticed when Seojin was cold and would leave a blanket on the sofa. He noticed when Seojin ran out of blue pencils and a new pack would appear on the desk the next morning. But the outside world was starting to bleed in. Seojin found his phone in the kitchen drawer one afternoon. He'd left it there, afraid to look at it. When he finally turned it on, it nearly exploded with notifications. 92 missed calls. 147 messages. All from Ryujin. Where are you? Don't be dramatic, Seojin. The kiss didn't mean anything. Taehyuk is a monster. He's using you to get to me. Pick up the phone. No. Then the tone shifted. I can't sleep without you here. The house is too quiet. I made a mistake. Come home and we can talk about this. I'm coming to get you. Seojin felt a wave of nausea. For years, these messages would have sent him into a spiral of guilt. He would have called back, apologized for overreacting, and crawled back into Ryujin's bed. He's good at that, isn't he? Seojin jumped, dropping the phone onto the counter. Taehyuk was standing in the doorway, a stack of logs in his arms for the fireplace. The emotional whiplash, Taehyuk said walking past him. First he's the victim, then he's the king. He makes you feel like the world is ending, so you'll be the one to save him. Him. He sounds like he's hurting, Seojin said, his voice trembling. Taehyuk dropped the logs by the hearth with a heavy thud. He stood up, wiping the bark from his hands. He's not hurting Seojin. He's losing his favorite toy. There's a difference. I'm not a toy, Seojin said, though it felt like a lie. Then stop looking at that phone like it's a lifeline, Taehyuk said. He walked over and stood in front of Seojin. For the first time, he reached out. His hand hovered in the air, waiting. Seojin looked at the hand. It was scarred, the knuckles thick. It was a hand that had done violence. But it was open. Slowly, Seojin leaned forward until his forehead touched Taehyuk's chest. He didn't know why he did it. He just needed something solid. Taehyuk didn't wrap his arms around him immediately. He waited. He waited until Seojin exhaled, his shoulders finally dropping. Then Taehyuk's arms came around him. It wasn't a tight, possessive grip. It was a circle, a boundary. You're a beta, Seojin, Taehyuk murmured into his hair. You think that makes you weak because you can't fight an alpha scent. But you're the only one in that city who ever saw Ryujin for what he was and stayed anyway. That's not weakness. That's a level of loyalty he never deserved. Seojin closed his eyes, listening to the steady, slow beat of Taehyuk's heart. It was so different from Ryujin's, which always raced with anger or adrenaline. What happens when he comes? Seojin asked. He won't get past the gate, Taehyuk said. But he's powerful. He has the Southern Syndicate behind him. Taehyuk pulled back just enough to look Seojin in the eye. And I have the truth. He discarded you publicly. By the laws of the Syndicate, he gave up his claim. He can scream all he wants, but the law is on my side. And so is my patience. Taehyuk's thumb brushed against Seojin's cheek. It was a light touch, barely there. I won't mark you, Seojin, Taehyuk said. I know that's what you're waiting for. The other shoe to drop. The moment I claim you, so I can own you. But I don't want a mark. I want a partner. I don't know how to be that, Seojin whispered. Then we'll start small, Taehyuk said. Help me with the fire. As they sat by the hearth, the orange glow reflecting off the dark wood of the library, Seojin felt a tiny spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't love, not yet. It was hope. But outside, in the dark, the lights of a car appeared at the end of the long, winding driveway. Ryujin hadn't come to talk. He'd come to burn it all down. Chapter 5. The smell of burnt bridges. The headlights cut through the library windows like searchlights. Seojin felt his breath hitch, that specific low hum of a high-end engine. He knew it anywhere. It was Ryujin's car. Taehyuk didn't jump. He didn't even look startled. He just set his coffee mug down on the wooden table with a quiet clack. Stay here, Taehyuk said. No, Seojin said, his voice surprising even himself. He stood up, his legs feeling like lead. If I stay here, I'm still hiding. I'm still the beta in the corner. Taehook looked at him for a long beat. He didn't argue. He didn't tell Seojin he was too weak. He just nodded once and opened the front door. The New York winter air rushed and cold and biting. Ryujin was already out of the car. He looked like a wreck. His expensive silk shirt was unbuttoned at the top. His hair was a mess. And even from the porch, Seojin could smell the toxic sour scent of an alpha losing control. Seojin, Ryujin shouted, his voice cracking. Get in the car. Right now. I've had enough of this game. Seojin stayed on the porch, his hand white-knuckled on the railing. It's not a game, Ryujin. You gave me away. You kissed her. You told me I was a quiet knight and nothing more. I was angry. Ryujin stepped forward, his eyes glowing with that dark, predatory alpha light. You know how I get. I needed to blow off steam. But you're mine. You don't belong in this. This morgue with a man who doesn't even have the balls to mark you. Ryujin looked at Taehyuk, his lip curling. Look at him, Seojin. He's a statue. He doesn't love you. He's just keeping you to piss me off. Taehyuk stepped forward, placing himself just an inch in front of Seojin. He didn't growl. He didn't puff out his chest. He just stood there, a wall of calm. You're trespassing, Ryujin, Taehyuk said. He's my beta. Ryujin lunged, trying to grab Seojin's wrist. In a flash, Taehyuk's hand shot out. He caught Ryujin's arm midair. The sound of their bones hitting was loud in the quiet night. Taehyuk didn't strike him. He just held him. He held him with a strength that looked effortless, his expression completely flat. He isn't a thing. Strength that looked effortless, his expression completely flat. He isn't a thing, Taehyuk said, his voice dropping into that terrifying low register. He isn't a trophy, and he isn't yours. Let go of me. Ryujin snarled, trying to use his alpha command, the voice that forced Beatus to obey. See, Eugene. Come here. Now. The command hit Seojin like a physical wave. His knees buckled. His brain screamed at him to move, to run to Ryujin, to satisfy the alpha's demand. It was biological. It was how he was raised. But then he felt a hand on his back. Taehyuk's hand. It wasn't pushing him. It was just there. A warm, steady weight that broke the spell of the alpha's voice. Seojin looked at Ryujin, at the sweating, angry man who looked like he wanted to break Seojin just to prove he could. Then he looked at Taehyuk, who was watching Seojin, waiting for him to decide. I'm staying, Seojin said. It was barely a whisper, but in the silence, it sounded like a gunshot. Ryujin froze. What? I'm staying here, Seojin said louder, his voice gaining strength. For 3 years, I waited for you to see me. You never did. Taehyuk saw me on the first night. He saw me when I was crying over burnt toast. He saw me when I was just a shadow. Go home, Ryujin. Go marry your Southern Alpha. I'm done being your quiet knight. Ryujin looked like he wanted to scream, to fight, to tear the house down. But Taehyuk's grip on his arm tightened just a fraction. The gates are opening, Taehyuk said. If you aren't through them in 60 seconds, my security team will treat you as a hostile. And I think we both know how that ends. Ryujin ripped his arm away, his face twisted in a mask of pure hate. He looked at Seojin one last time. You'll regret this. You're a beta. You'll always need an alpha to tell you who you are. He got back in the car and floored it, the tires spitting gravel as he sped away into the dark. The silence that followed was heavy. Seojin let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 3 years. His legs finally gave out, and he sank onto the porch steps. Chapter 6. The Canvas of New Life. The morning after the confrontation, Vermont was covered in a fresh layer of snow. It was so white it hurt to look at. Seojin sat at the kitchen table, watching Taehyuk make coffee. The alpha looked the same as always, calm, steady, and quiet. But something had changed. The air in the house didn't feel like a political bond anymore. Felt like home. Is the war going to start now? Seojin asked. Taehyuk set a black coffee in front of him. Ryujin will try to make trouble with the council. He'll say I stole property. But I have the gala footage. I have 20 witnesses who heard him say he was done with you. He has no leg to stand on. Taehyuk sat down across from him. He reached across the table and for the first time took Seohyun's hand. His skin was rough, warm and real. Why didn't you hit him? Seojin asked. You could have ended it right there. Because if I used violence to keep you, I'd be no better than him, Taehyuk said. I don't want you because I'm stronger than Ryujin. I want you because you make this house feel like it has a soul. Seojin looked down at their joined hands. He was right about one thing. I've spent my whole life being told who I am by alphas. I don't know how to be a partner yet. I'm still scared I'll mess it up. Then mess it up, Taehook said, a tiny rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Burn the toast. Draw outside the lines. Forget to call me back. I'm not going anywhere. Seojin felt a lump in his throat. Taehook, about the mark. You said you wouldn't do it unless I chose it. I'm in it, Taehook said. I want it, Seojin whispered. Not today. Not tomorrow. But one day when I finish the painting in the library. Well, I can look in the mirror and see Seojin, not just the beta. I want the world to know I chose you. Taehook squeezed his hand. I can wait a lifetime for that. For months later, the library was no longer a room of shadows. The walls were covered in Seojin sketches. There was a large canvas in the corner, a painting of a forest at midnight, lit by a single steady moon. Seojin wasn't the quiet shadow anymore. He had started helping Taehyuk with the Northern Syndicate's social programs, using his emotional intelligence to bridge gaps that alphas usually closed with fists. He was respected, not because of ascent, but because of his mind. One evening as the sun was setting behind the mountains, Seojin walked up to the third floor. He knocked on Taehyuk's door. Come in, Taehyuk's voice rumbled. Seojin entered. Taehyuk was at his desk, but he immediately stood up when he saw Seojin. He always did that, a small gesture of respect that never failed to make Seojin's heart flutter. Seojin walked over and stood in Taehyuk's space. He reached up, his fingers brushing against the alpha's neck, right where the scent gland was. I finished the painting, Seojin said. Taehyuk's eyes went dark, the gray turning to charcoal. He wrapped his arms around Seohyun's waist, pulling him flush against his chest. And I'm ready, Seojin said, tilting his head back to expose his throat. Taehyuk didn't rush. He leaned down, his lips brushing against Seohyun's skin, his breath warm and steady. He waited for Seojin to exhale, to lean in, to give that final, silent permission. When the mark finally came, it wasn't a claim of ownership. It wasn't a biological cage. It was a bridge, a golden thread of light that connected Seojin's heart to the only man who had ever been patient enough to let him grow. As the snow fell outside the Vermont house, Seojin finally closed his eyes. He wasn't a beta or an omega or a piece of property. He was home, and for the first time in his life, the silence wasn't lonely. It was perfect. Stories like Seojin's remind us that being pushed aside isn't the end of the book. It's just the moment the wrong hands let go so the right ones can finally find us. Real love doesn't need to be loud, and it certainly shouldn't hurt. It should feel like that quiet, steady Vermont house, a place where you finally have the room to breathe. If Seojin and Taehyuk's journey moved you, or if you've ever felt like a quiet night waiting for someone to see your true colors, I'd love for you to stay a while. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button to join our community here at the BL Story Room. We're building a sanctuary for these kind of stories, the ones that start with a heart in pieces and end with a soul that's finally found its home. Before you go, I want to hear from you in the comments. What part of Taehyuk's patience moved you the most? Was it the moment he refused to mark Seojin? Or when he simply held him while he cried over burnt toast? I read every single one of your thoughts. Until the next chapter, stay soft, stay brave, and I'll see you back here in the room.